You know what finally made me rethink everything I thought I knew about garden planning? I was standing in my kitchen in January, and middle of winter, nothing growing outside, and I realized I was about to spend $400 on groceries for the month. $400. And most of that was produce. Stuff I could have grown. Stuff I had grown the summer before, actually. But I hadn't put enough away, hadn't planned the timing right, and by February I was right back to buying everything at the store like I didn't even have a garden. That same winter I was visiting an Amish family here in Lancaster County. Their cellar was full. I mean floor to ceiling. Canned tomatoes, dried beans, root vegetables in sand bins, fermented cabbage, shelves of pickled everything. And their garden wasn't even that big, maybe a quarter acre. That's when I realized the difference wasn't size, it was planning. Today I'm going to walk you through exactly how Amish families plan a single garden to feed a household for an entire year, and how you can start doing the same thing even if your space is half that size. And stick around to the end because I'll share a simple Amish scheduling method that most gardening books completely ignore, one that practically guarantees you won't have a gap in your harvest. Here's my confession. For most of my 27 years of gardening, I plan my garden the way most people do. I flipped through a seed catalog in March, picked what sounded good, planted it all in May, harvested what came in through summer, and then the garden was done. I'd put up some tomatoes, freeze some peppers, maybe dry some herbs, but I never sat down and asked the real question: how much food does my family actually need for 12 months, and what do I have to grow to get there? The Amish families I've gotten to know here in Lancaster County don't think about gardening as a summer hobby. They think about it as a food production system for the entire year, and the philosophy behind it goes deep. It's rooted in self-sufficiency and stewardship. The idea that the land God gave you should provide for your family if you're willing to work with it properly. They don't plant what sounds fun. They plant what the pantry needs. And here's where the science backs them up. Researchers at Penn State Extension have documented that a well-planned quarter-acre garden in zones 6 and 7 can produce between 800 and 1,000 pounds of food in a single season. That's enough to meaningfully feed a family of 4 for a year when combined with proper preservation. The Amish have known this for generations. The rest of us are just starting to catch up. The first thing Amish gardeners understand is that planning starts with the pantry, not the seed catalog. Before they ever touch soil, they sit down and figure out what their family eats in a year. Not what they'd like to grow, what they actually consume. I watched an Amish neighbor do this with a pencil and a sheet of notebook paper. She wrote down every vegetable her family eats regularly, then estimated how many quarts canned, how many pounds dried, and how many bushels stored fresh they'd need to get from September all the way through the following June. For her family of 6, that meant roughly 200 quarts of canned tomatoes, 80 quarts of green beans, 40 quarts of pickles, 60 pounds of dried beans, and about 300 pounds of root vegetables for cellar storage. Then she worked backward from those numbers to figure out exactly how many row feet of each crop to plant. That's a totally different starting point than most of us use. Most home gardeners plant 6 tomato plants because that sounds right. She plants 22 because that's what it takes to produce 200 quarts. I'll be honest with you. When I first saw her list, I thought it was overkill. It wasn't. It was precision. This next piece is one that I completely overlooked for most of my gardening life, and that's succession planting tied to preservation windows. Amish families don't plant everything at once. They stagger plantings so that crops come in waves, and each wave is timed to a specific preservation method. Early spring lettuce and greens are for fresh eating. The first round of bush beans goes in around mid-May in zones 6 and 7, a bit earlier in zones 8 and 9, and that's the canning batch. A second planting goes in 6 weeks later for fresh eating through late summer. A third planting in late July is the one they dry for winter soups. Tomatoes follow a similar pattern. Early varieties for fresh slicing, a big main crop of paste tomatoes like Amish paste or Roma for canning, and a late planting of cherry types for fall salsa and drying. The key is that every single planting has a destination. Nothing is planted without knowing where it's going. Fresh table, canning jar, root cellar, or drying rack. A Mennonite friend of mine put it simply, "We don't grow food, we grow a pantry." That stuck with me. Now here's where the Amish approach really comes together, and it's the part most modern gardeners skip entirely. They plan their garden layout around storage categories, not plant families. Most of us organize by what grows well together or what fits in a raised bed. Amish families organize by what gets canned, what gets dried, what gets cellared, and what gets eaten fresh. The canning crops, tomatoes, green beans, cucumbers, and beets, get the biggest blocks of space because they need the highest volume. In zones 3 through 5, where the growing season is shorter, they compensate by choosing faster maturing varieties and starting more crops indoors or in cold frames, which many Amish families build from old windows and scrap lumber. The root cellar crops, potatoes, carrots, turnips, onions, winter squash, cabbage, get the next biggest allocation. Then fresh eating crops fill in the gaps. When I restructured my own garden this way, it was like putting on glasses for the first time. Suddenly I could see exactly where I was overplanting things that don't store well and underplanting the crops that would actually carry me through winter. This is the part that surprised me the most, how Amish families think about time, not just space. And their calendar isn't divided into planting season and not planting season. It's divided into about 14 different windows across the full year, and each window has a job. January and February are for seed inventory, equipment repair, and planning. March is for starting onions and cole crops indoors. April through May is primary planting. June through August isn't just growing, it's also the heaviest preservation period. Canning starts in July and runs straight through September. September and October are for root harvest and cellar loading. November is for putting the garden to bed, and this is important, with cover crops, not bare soil. December is for reviewing what worked and adjusting the plan for next year. Every month has a role. I want to be upfront here because I think honesty matters more than hype. Adopting this kind of calendar takes effort. Your first year, you won't get it perfect. Realistic first-year expectations are filling about 60% of your annual produce needs from your garden. That's still a massive reduction in grocery spending. Improve your technique each year and those numbers climb, but I'd rather you start with honest expectations and be pleasantly surprised. If you're picking up what I'm putting down and you want more of these deep dives into how Amish and Mennonite families approach the garden, hit subscribe. I've got a lot more of these coming. Now, and just let's keep going because there's more to this system. The next layer is what ties this whole system together, and this is where you start to see how it all connects. Amish families don't just plan what to grow and when. They plan how each crop feeds the next season's soil. The bean rows fix nitrogen. The squash leaves shade the ground and suppress weeds. The corn stalks become mulch. The canning waste goes into compost that feeds next year's tomato beds. Nothing leaves the property. It's a closed loop, and every crop serves at least two purposes, one for the pantry and one for the soil. This isn't a standalone trick. It's one piece of a system, and the system is what makes the difference. Let me share a few patterns I've noticed, mostly in my own garden, honestly, that keep people from making this work. The first one is planting for variety instead of volume. I did this myself for years, so no judgment here. I'd grow 1 or 2 plants of 15 different things instead of 20 plants of the 5 things my family actually eats all winter. It looks impressive in July, but the pantry's empty by November. The second pattern is ignoring preservation capacity. You can grow 200 pounds of tomatoes, but if you can only process 20 quarts on a weekend, a lot of that's going to waste. Amish families plan their harvest volume around how fast they can preserve, not just how much they can grow. Third, treating the garden and the kitchen as separate systems. In the Amish model, they're one system. What happens in the kitchen in August dictates what gets planted in April. And the last pattern, one I see all the time, is not tracking actual consumption. If you don't know how many quarts of tomato sauce your family uses between October and May, you're just guessing at how much to grow. The Amish don't guess, they count. Now, here's something I picked up from an Amish family a few years ago that I haven't seen in any gardening book or YouTube video. They keep what they call a planting ledger, though they don't call it that, that's just my word for it. It's a notebook, usually just a plain composition book, and every year they write down exactly what they planted, how many row feet, what date it went in, what date they first harvested, total yield by weight or quart count, and one line about how it performed. Good year, too dry, beetles bad. They've been doing this for generations. The family I learned this from had records going back to their grandmother, and here's why this matters so much. After 3 years of keeping your own version of this ledger, you don't need to guess at anything. You know exactly how many row feet of green beans gives you 80 quarts. You know that your paste tomatoes need to go in by May 15th in your zone or you lose 2 weeks of production. You know that your carrot yield drops in years when you skip the compost. This one practice, just writing it down, is what separates an Amish garden plan from a wish list. I started keeping mine 6 years ago, and it has transformed how I plan. Get yourself a cheap notebook and start this season. You'll thank yourself by year 3. Well, that's what I've learned from Amish and Mennonite gardeners about planning a full year of food from one garden. It's not about having the biggest plot or the fanciest setup. It's about starting with what your family needs, working backward to what you plant, timing everything to a preservation method, and keeping honest records so the plan gets better every single year. If any of this changed how you think about your garden plan, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Tell me what your biggest gap is. Was it volume, timing, preservation, or something else? Hit subscribe if you want more of these deep dives into how traditional communities grow food with methods that have worked for generations. Thanks for spending time with me today. I'll see you in the next one.